Although there is a mural of whales by the artist Wylan in Portsmouth, the city had only a very brief history of participation in that industry. So in the 1870s, when Sam Williams decided to go a whaling, he had to actually go down to Boston to ship out on the F.H. Moore for his voyage that took him to Key West. By the 1884 report of the New Hampshire fisheries that you read, whaling isn't even mentioned. But in the 1830s and 40s, Portsmouth entrepreneurs set out to kill every whale in sight. Their attempt to turn New Hampshire's only seaport into the next Nantucket or New Bedford met with initial limited success before sinking into oblivion. If not for the discovery of a Portsmouth whaling journal about a decade ago, those tales might have been forgotten. Kenneth Martin took from that to write his book Heavy Weather and Hard Luck, which surprised most local historians here because they had just missed that this had even happened in Portsmouth history. So in the early 1800s, times were really tough in Portsmouth. Despite these times of privateering, especially during the War of 1812, the city's sea trading industry had really pretty much collapsed after that and never really revived. So when some clever fellow suggested turning Portsmouth into a whaling community, it sounded like a good idea. So the local craftsmen had certainly been building some fine whaling ships for that industry in New Bedford and Salem and Nantucket. And at that point, whale oil for lamps was selling at about 23 cents a gallon, which today is about $5 a gallon. And a whaling ship could return with thousands of gallons of oil. And sperm oil, which is used as an industrial lubricant, brought about 4 times that price. So this, of course, is like long before there's any sort of concern for it being an endangered species. Whales could be harpooned and killed, and they were still plentiful. Not so much now. All one had to do was find them. So if other ports had hundreds of whaling ships, why couldn't Portsmouth? In June of 1832, the Portsmouth Whaling Company was formed at the Bell Tavern on Congress Street. Of course, any far-fetched idea sounds so much better over a pint of beer, doesn't it? The new business idea, called corporations, had succeeded in Portsmouth before, so by sharing costs, a group of investors could create a business, split up the risk, and divide the profits. This venturesome attitude had already led to the funding of banks, public baths, steamboats, even bridges. So the Portsmouth Whaling Company investors included Ichabod Goodwin and the more famous Thomas Layton, who managed the New Hampshire Gazette newspaper. He was the father of Celia Thaxter, the famous writer who lived out on the Isle of Shoals. But in 1832, this company had no ship, no crew, no expertise, no provisions. But why not? There was investment money. And soon the group had purchased a 98-foot and 300-ton whaler called the Pocahontas. Supplies weren't easy to find in Portsmouth, so many things had to be custom made. Experienced crewmen were needed for the voyages, especially because they would last for many years. And then specialized whaling gear, which couldn't be found in Portsmouth, had to be purchased elsewhere or else made locally at great expense. So startup costs for this is pretty high. However, other entrepreneurs speculating on big returns also decided to take the plunge. Charles Cushing quickly outfitted a ship called Triton, and later the Plato for his own whaling venture. Another group under the Ladd brothers, like the Moffat Ladd House that's in Portsmouth, also decided to cash in on this supposed whaling boom. So investors who came in each paid $500 to get 40 shares of stock in the ship for the Ladds, which was called the Anne Perry. In order to corner this local market, the Ladds also built a whale oil refinery on Market Street, the only one of its kind in the region. They placed this ad that you see on the right in the Portsmouth Journal, boasting of oil and candles of the very best quality. The refinery would stay open until 1849, the year after the end of Portsmouth's 16-year venture into this industry. So going a whaling often entailed the ships being gone for 3 to 4 years. So on this ship, Pocahontas, that was the Portsmouth Whaling Company's ship, they hired Captain William Walker for the inaugural voyage. Walker maintained a log from his very first day until the ship's return. So from some of his entries, in February 1833, a few days after reaching the Pacific, the crew got their first measure of whale oil, but not in the usual way. A ship's log's entries then records that the crew saw a cask out in the water and lowered a boat. They towed it alongside, they hoisted it up onto our deck. It was an English-made cask of 60 gallons and full of right whale oil. By its appearance, it had probably been in the water for some time. And then in December of 1833, the Pocahontas had a delightful surprise, he wrote. A distant sail was spotted on the horizon, and it proved to be the whaler Anne Perry, which had left Portsmouth in January of 1833. The two whalers got together for a gam. So a gam, it used to mean a pot of whales, but then it came to be known as this social gathering of the whalers themselves out at sea. So Walker writes, I received a letter by her, the first news from home. Every heart is full of joy. That was probably the only meeting between the two Portsmouth ships in their history. So on the ship Anne Perry, the farm boy Leander Huntress of Dover signed on as a greenie. And in his journal, which is now in the collections at the Portsmouth Athenaeum, his first personal comment came on August 23rd, just days into the journey. Sweet home, there is no place like home. It would prove to be a very long journey, with the Anne Perry spending most of her time in the Indian Ocean. So of course whaling is dangerous. On the top right photo shows one of the small boats being crushed by a whale. Other accidents could befall sailors on board. One of Huntress's most memorable journal entries is a tribute to his shipmate, Charles Boge of Portsmouth. He fell from the mizzen-top gallant head, where he was on the lookout for the whales. The 17-year-old Charles suffered a head injury and a broken leg and lingered for only a few hours before dying on December 30th, 1840. Huntress wrote, in the midst of life we are in death. And so then in his journal he drew an illustration of a cenotaph bearing the message, sacred to the memory of Charles Boge. So the ocean in the southwest of Cape Leeuwin, off of Australia, that area there, was very good for right whaling, but the Anne Perry was harried by many spells of bad weather. So Huntress wrote, November 1st, 1841, 4 p.m. the wind shifted south-southwest and blew tremendously. It blew the fore-topmast staysail into 10,000 pieces. Blew harder for half an hour, more than I've ever experienced. By 6 p.m. we're settling into a gale. So gale force winds did not prevent the boats from lowering out into the ocean trying to find a whale, but the results were usually frustrating. December 5th, he wrote, adieu to the whaling grounds, amen. Unfortunately, that comment was only wishful thinking. The ship stayed on the right whale grounds there for another 4 whales that they'd found in December. And in January 1842, they returned to Geograph Bay. But then they stood out bound for Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. That's over here, so they're going that way. And he states, sperm whales again, en route to Madagascar. The Perry took 4, including, on the 9th of February, a proverbial 90-barrel whale. That's a good size. The industry standard for good luck. On the 8th of March, having been replete with bullocks, bean corns, and bananas, the ship left St. Augustine Bay for home. The Anne Perry returned June 1st, 1842, 977 days at sea. So once home, Huntress then received his lay. So a lay is just this portion of payment that's done by shares in the profit. So there's no actual wages. It just depends on how many barrels of oil they manage to take, and then when they return home, how the market bears that, whether that price is still high and they get a good return on the oil that they've brought back. So Huntress received his lay or share of the value at $160.97, far less than he would have earned at any skill that he'd done on shore. So one of the few whale ships that remains, I think probably in the world, is the whale ship Charles W. Morgan at Mystic Seaport. It was also on a previous page. And so if there's anything more that you want to find out about whaling or whale ships, going to Mystic Seaport or New Bedford Whaling Museum, if you haven't done it already, I can give you so much more information than this very brief outlining of the industry. All right, next up we'll take a look at some shipbuilding.